cursing my curiosity. I ask for your advice. It's unlikely you can help, but I've found myself in trouble, and I have no one else to turn to. All my friends are here. It's funny, but for me, it's not an empty phrase. Let my story serve you as entertainment for some, a warning for others. I know, Anons, that something inside you, a tiny, almost suffocated part of you, crushed by reason and cynicism, still says while reading these threads, what if it's true? I know this from my own experience. Listen to it this time. I first arrived at the station when I was 16. Returning home, I was only worried about not getting caught by my parents. I was so drunk. The metro was about to close for the night. I was sitting in the train and fully focused on keeping down the vodka I had drunk in the stairwell, mixed with crackers, which were the only snack we had that winter evening. Fortunately, the train was empty. My stop was the final one, and I didn't pay attention to the noise of the loudspeakers. When the train came to a screeching halt with the doors slamming shut, I registered something strange at the edge of my awareness. Maybe the lighting was dimmer than it should have been in an empty metro at midnight, or the echo was louder. Minute after minute passed, and it was too quiet at the station behind me. I lifted my head, which I had been holding with my hands to cope with the helicopters in my head, and turned to look at the train windows. The faintly lit platform was filled with silent people. Rows of women and men stood motionless, shoulder to shoulder pressed right up against the train, only a couple dozen centimeters away from me. They seemed to be trying to peer inside through the dusty glimmering glass. Their dense formation blocked the open doors, making the passage narrow and stretched in both directions as far as the eye could see. Shoulders and heads vanished in the dimness between the broad marble columns that supported the strangely low, oppressive ceiling. The station was packed, like it happens in the early morning during rush hour when the train is late. The silence that hung over the crowd was unnatural, impossible for such a large number of people gathered in one place. No matter how hard I listened, I could only hear my own, suddenly, heavy breathing. No one shifted from foot to foot, whispered, or coughed. No one made a move to enter the completely empty train. And then I realized that these were not people at all. Something had shifted, not so much in space, but in my eyes. It was like when you finally see the hidden image in a stereogram. Once you've noticed it, you can't unsee it, because it was there all along. The entire station was occupied by life-sized cardboard cutouts, replicating the outlines of passengers calmly waiting for the train. Carelessly painted, these plywood figures could only be mistaken for real people if you were drunk or half asleep. There was a colorful blob where a woman's purse should be, and a barely marked checkered patch on a brown jacket there. And all of them, only faintly drawn facial features, just painted props from a children's theater workshop. On the ceiling, maybe a third of the lights were on, giving a sense of depth to the otherwise flat surfaces. But I had drunk enough vodka by then to have noticed it immediately. When the doors hissed and slammed shut, I almost screamed. The announcer over the loudspeakers announced the next stop, and I, as if hypnotized, watched the rows of faceless flat figures passing by until everything was cut off by the darkness of the tunnel. But what was that, I thought, sliding down the seats and wiping the sweat off my forehead with my hat? Had a misaligned switch sent the train to a secret branch, and I had seen Metro too? I had heard somewhere that the technical service stations really have low ceilings and lack decorations like moldings. Maybe this was one of those, and city services use these spaces to store junk and props for the next jam festival. Why not? Fear past replaced by burning curiosity. I'm the kind of guy who would happily explore secret metro branches or abandoned collectors, but I never had the chance, and I stuck to reading digger websites. But now, luck had fallen right into my hands. It's a shame that in the shock of the moment I froze because I could have taken some amazing photos, shown them off on the forum and asked the old-timers about it. A trip to the mysterious station was absolutely necessary. Of course, I was planning to jump off the tracks and walk back through the tunnel to find it. But since I ended up here once, maybe I'd get lucky again. I decided I should at least be ready for it, checked my watch, and wrote down on my palm the approximate time of my next encounter with the puzzle that had so excited me. By the way, don't ask me which branch I live on or where the station is. The last thing I want is for any of you to follow my path. Time passed. At first, I purposely rode this stretch of the line late at night, but with no results. Then, I started doing it less often. The initial excitement turned into disappointment, and then boredom. I had to admit, whether it was the driver's mistake or a switch malfunction, it was foolish to hope that the situation would repeat, especially when I happened to be on the train. A couple of times I told this story online, and to my classmates over beer, getting fair ridicule in return. The strange station was forgotten for years, and I lived my usual life. I prepared for the final exams, went to tutors, participated in Olympiads, fought with my parents, met a girl, fell head over heels in love with her, and dramatically broke up a year later, and entered university. I barely passed the first semester, returning home after an exam that had drained my nerves. I was flipping through the book I had brought, but I couldn't focus on what I was reading. My mind was far away, making plans for the summer. The train slowed down, and I froze in place before the pneumatic doors stopped hissing. My fingers, flipping the page, hadn't completed the movement. The memory of the station returned instantly and completely, without any particular reason, but without any doubt. Even before I looked up from the page, I knew it had happened again. By the way, don't ask me which branch I live on or where the station is. The last thing I want is for any of you to follow my path. Time passed. At first, I purposely rode this stretch of the line late at night, but with no results. Then, I started doing it less often. The initial excitement turned into disappointment, and then boredom. I had to admit, whether it was the driver's mistake or a switch malfunction, it was foolish to hope that the situation would repeat, especially when I happened to be on the train. A couple of times I told this story online, and to my classmates over beer, getting fair ridicule in return. The strange station was forgotten for years, and I lived my usual life. I prepared for the final exams, went to tutors, participated in Olympiads, fought with my parents, met a girl, fell head over heels in love with her, and dramatically broke up a year later, and entered university. I barely passed the first semester, returning home after an exam that had drained my nerves. I was flipping through the book I had brought, but I couldn't focus on what I was reading. My mind was far away, making plans for the summer. The train slowed down, and I froze in place before the pneumatic doors stopped hissing. My fingers, flipping the page, hadn't completed the movement. The memory of the station returned instantly and completely, without any particular reason, but without any doubt. Even before I looked up from the page, I knew it had happened again. I looked out the window. The station was full of people. No, not cardboard cutouts like before. These were people. Maybe this time the long lamps gave off more yellow light. The platform was almost visible through and through, and only the opposite platform faded into shadows. But people stood there too. It could have seemed like everyone was looking at the approaching train, but that wasn't the case. Their eyes were closed. The light spilling from the low ceiling made the skin on their faces unnaturally smooth. Or maybe it wasn't the light at all. I thought of the wax figures from the traveling amusement park I had visited once as a child. But even those dolls with their yellowish faces had carefully detailed pores, skin texture, wrinkles and moles. These dolls had none of that. Not even eyelashes or expressions. As I looked deeper into the darkness, the place began to lose its resemblance to a real metro station. Waves, like drafts, of rustling sounds flew across the crowd gathered in the cramped underground chamber, from one end of the hall to the other. They carried with them a faint, multi-voiced whisper. Or was it just my imagination? Struggling to stand up from the creaking seat, I took 2 slow steps forward, burning with an undefined fear. The fear came from not understanding what was happening, from its complete unnaturalness. And yet, I wanted to examine the scene as thoroughly as I could. The figures were not completely still. Standing in the train doors, I saw how they slightly shifted, fidgeting with the fingers of their hanging arms. A little bit of movement, a brief sway of a briefcase held by an elderly man. A woman behind him, without opening her eyes, slightly moved her head toward me as if listening, tense, ready to run or fight if necessary. I moved closer to the first row of people, almost right up to them. From this distance, I was able to confirm the suspicion that had formed in my mind. They all looked like soap scum covered in textures, like poorly rendered characters from a game with graphics set to the lowest quality, an NPC ace with deactivated animations and broken scripts. The old man's hand had become one with the handle of his briefcase, and the collar of his neighbor's shirt smoothly merged into his neck. Their hair gleamed as if made of plastic, yet they were alive. Beneath their closed, twitching eyelids, their pupils swayed from side to side, like people in the early stages of sleep. But, of course, they weren't people. The station, in the 2 years since our first encounter, had grown a crop of more convincing parodies, but their essence remained the same. Painted cardboard cutouts. I looked around. The air at the station smelled like nothing, as though it had been passed through a sterilizer. The platform was much shorter than it should have been, so the train was hidden under the arch of the tunnel. Only one carriage on the left and right of mine. Aside from the silent, dreaming mannequins, I was completely alone here. From somewhere above, from the darkness, there came a short squeak and hiss from a speaker, as if someone had pressed the microphone button, but then changed their mind about speaking. And the light. Something was wrong with the light here. It flowed strangely from the ceiling lamps, shifting across the spectrum from a murky yellow to shades of ultraviolet at the edge of my vision. Not at all like the light in the train, or any normal light really. For some reason, it was this strange light that scared me the most of all I had seen at the station so far. I quickly retreated deeper into the train, which I instinctively considered a safe place, trying to keep the whole space under control. I even tried not to blink. It seemed to me that the sound which I had assumed was the whisper drifting through the crowd had intensified. From where it was coming, the statues began to move a little more. I saw heads slowly bobbing, a nod this way, a nod that way, closer, even closer. In the next second, the sound disappeared in the hiss of the closing doors, and the train started moving. I calmed down and gathered myself only at the next station, where I saw the most ordinary real people. A homeless man was sleeping on a bench, a police patrol was heading his way, and an old woman was rummaging through her bags, muttering to herself. I took a deep breath of air. No hint of sterility, which was somewhat helped by the homeless man. Running up the escalator, it seemed I was having my first ever bout of claustrophobia. I thought about the crowd left behind at the dark station, and the approaching rustle, the whisper. It was like someone was pushing through the stems of plants across the night field toward me. The next day, while walking past the shelves of a hardware store, I was reflecting on human nature. I know many people, and you probably do too, who, when faced with a mystery, with something so abnormal and frightening, would do everything they can to forget about it and never come into contact with it again. And from an evolutionary perspective, this is a rational approach. Oh yes, not descending into a dark cave without need. That's rule number 1, promoting the survival of the species. But, I thought, picking out a suitable rope and carabiners, there must be those who would climb into the cave without hesitation. A small percentage of born explorers, a group with, I suppose, a high mortality rate. Otherwise, by focusing purely on survival, the species would fall into stagnation. What would you do in my place? Would you simply forget about it? Leave everything as it was? What I saw there, in that pocket, someone else's, of space, was 100% counterfeit. An unreal reality, caught in the process of mimicry. It, damn it, completely changes our understanding of how the world is structured. When faced with something like this, you can't just turn around and walk away whistling. I need an explanation. What is it? What is it? A portal to a parallel dimension, a point where worlds intersect, an unexplored natural phenomenon. Is it possible that this pathetic imitation of a new metro station originated on its own, under the influence of environmental factors and unknown laws of physics? Did it grow on the metro branch like an ugly tuber, just as water, when it crystallizes, inevitably forms uniform, neat structures? After all, the ability of inanimate objects to self-organize is known and is not something unbelievable. No, nonsense. Staring blankly at the store shelves, I considered the options. What if it's dangerous? Shouldn't there be a mind behind such an attempt to pretend? One that is in some way similar to human consciousness. A malevolent mind, a predator mind. And then the whole station is its trap nets, set for an inattentive, delayed passenger. But it didn't attack me. Yet. I need to try to establish contact with it. On the other hand, is a mind really necessary for hunting? Carnivorous plants, for example, successfully mimic dewdrops on leaves, attracting insects, doing so without malice and without consciousness. Maybe there's no one to establish contact with at the station at all. Maybe as soon as I set foot on its floor tiles, it will simply devour me. Let's not rule out the possibility of my progressing psychosis, accompanied by hallucinations. Or, after all, this might still turn out to be a classic invasion from the outside, threatening all of humanity. So many questions, so many hypotheses. I needed proof to bring others into investigating this phenomenon, and if necessary, to develop protective measures. There are a few suitable candidates among the professors at my university, people with sharp minds and broad views who would at least listen to me, but I would have to bring very, very convincing arguments. So, I decided to spend the summer researching what was stubbornly trying to pass itself off as a metro station. I made my trips regular, riding the short on-stop loop for hours to figure out the optimal time and conditions for the station's appearance. I sifted through gigabytes of nonsense on the internet, looking for similar cases, verifying their credibility. I started a laboratory journal, where I meticulously recorded everything I thought had any scientific value. And every time I descended into the metro, I kept my equipment ready. I was fully armed. I thought I understood I was playing with fire, that I recognized the risk. What a naive fool I was. Turning the attempts to discover the paranormal into a routine, I became more and more distracted over time. It's hard to maintain focus when you're riding the same stretch of track for months with no result. Eventually that morning, I simply fell asleep on the train. No surprise, since I was going to the metro every day at its opening to capture the quiet, early and late hours. In previous attempts, I'd been alone in all three adjoining carriages, which fit on the station, so I thought it was a necessary condition. I was right. The second condition, however, was losing my attention. While I was focused on the goal, it was harder for the station to connect with me. Don't think this is not just speculation. The station explained everything to me. Waking up in the hollow silence, I cursed under my breath. The station was all around me. Familiar figures, only this time almost indistinguishable from real people. Rows of them, like crops, stretching into the darkness. There were hundreds of them here, maybe 1,000. I shuddered at the thought that for some time, all these creatures had been watching me sleep peacefully, just a meter away. Pulling myself together, I dropped my large backpack on the floor and started taking action. I took out 4 telescopic rods, an old-fashioned anti-theft device that attaches to a bike's handlebars, and with 2 of them, I blocked the doors in the open position, then ran to the other end of the carriage and repeated the process there. Top and bottom in a brace. It didn't take long since I had practiced. The train wouldn't move with the doors open. The automatic system wouldn't allow it. I set up a tripod and turned on the borrowed camera. I attached a small reel with a decent amount of nylon cord to the vertical post, and the other end was fastened to a carabiner attached to my belt. I think divers use something like this. A sharp jerk would lock the reel, preventing me from being dragged anywhere. Pulling on thick rubber gloves up to my elbows, I shoved the taser, my only weapon, into my pocket and stood facing the silent crowd, breathing deeply and slowly, trying, if not to overcome the terror that gripped me, at least to stop the tremors shaking my body, more like convulsions. What am I doing, God? What am I doing? I swear, I've never been so afraid in my life. I stretched my hand forward and took a step. Before I could touch anyone, the crowd broke apart and retreated deeper into the station, parting to the sides with a mechanical synchrony, forming a corridor to the center of the station. It seemed to me that this coordinated action was no different in principle from the movement of a millipede's legs. The porcelain faces remained turned towards me, their numbers multiplying, insanely intensifying the effect of the uncanny valley. Rows, stretching beyond the fifth, disappeared into the half-light. But I could swear some of them were grinning widely. Their eyes danced in frantic saccades beneath their lowered eyelids. This was clearly an invitation. The next second would reveal what exactly: a first contact or dinner. Overcoming myself, I stepped onto the platform as if in a dream. Nothing happened. Slowly unspooling the rope, I walked through the line of figures, feeling the implied stares that seemed to touch my skin. Imagine being closely observed by the Easter Island statues. The silence was almost total. Here and there were whispers, and muffled laughter reached my ears a few times. The echo of my steps bounced off the vaults, the passage silently filling behind me with bodies. Once I found myself at the center. In the narrow circle the blind moving mannequins had cleared for me. I turned around and almost panicked when I saw how far I had strayed from the safety of the train. So familiar, so banal here. The windows glowed with normal light, unlike what was here. The tension was rising, almost physically palpable. I helplessly glanced around, not knowing what to do next. And then, at that moment, the countless eyes around me opened. The jumping pupils froze, focused on me, and their mouths stretched wide, too wide. Hundreds of gaping throats emitted a deafening noise, like radio static, echoed by a groan and a squeal from the station's loudspeakers above. The multi-voiced chorus, born from this chaos, gradually formed into words. 36. Reactivation of the cognitive subset of the organic interpreter. 22. Suppression of parasitic motivations in the subset. 16. Noise within permissible values. 10. Adjustment initiated to the subject. 8. Signal calibration. 5. Elimination of interferences. 3. Connection established. 1. Can you hear? Can you hear? Seek. Shut up. Quiet, for God's sake. I screamed back, covering my ears, and lost my balance, falling into the center of the illuminated pulsing circle. The volume of the synchronized wail decreased before I completely lost my hearing, transforming from a semi-mechanical screech into a church-like chant. Now, the black oval mouths, without bothering with articulation, began muttering in a rhythmic chant, but the meaning of their words still eluded me. The nearest ring of nightmarish creatures, never taking their eyes off me, began to sway gently from side to side, and soon the others behind them joined in. I felt myself becoming the center of a hypnotic dance. The interpreter is ready to work with the subject. Data exchange is possible, they sang, swaying. Protocol, speech, communication through vocalizations. Bandwidth limited by the recipient's perceptive capabilities. Non-wave structure, carbon-based, three-dimensional. Analysis complete. Vocabulary synchronization complete. Start. At the last word, the movement around me ceased instantly, and a heavy silence descended, broken only by the ringing in my ears. Several minutes passed, or maybe hours. I barely dared to breathe. I realized my legs had gone numb and slowly stood up, deeply regretting my reckless bravery that had brought me here. Confirmation of the absence of hostile intentions, a serious voice said, from right behind me. I spun around. Request for data exchange. A heavy-set man in a work uniform boomed from another sector of the circle. State your identifier, subject. Yes, congratulate me. Hooray! I think I became the first human to make contact with an intelligent non-human entity. That doesn't happen every day, does it? And like any exceptional event, the first contact came with its own drawbacks. We turned out to be so different, incredibly different. He told me his name, identifier. Having apparently gone through my meager vocabulary in search of a suitable term. His name is Io. Had I called him simply God, I wouldn't be too far off from the truth. By the way, maybe I'm mistaken in thinking I was the first one the beings of his kind spoke to. Perhaps before, we simply called such contactees shamans. I don't even know how long we talked, stumbling over almost every word in our attempt to convey it across the wire connecting our realities. The fact that our conversation even happened is a real miracle. But time on the station has a way of playing tricks. When I finally rose to the surface, returning to our world, I was hardly surprised to find it was still early morning of the same ill-fated day. Io turned out to be something of a scientist in that incomprehensible space where he exists. He detected our presence and found it curious. Yes, apparently curiosity isn't alien to him. He recognized us as a somewhat intelligent, though in his opinion rather peculiar form of life. He attempted to establish contact with the most receptive representative of that form, who had appeared on the lens of his metaphorical microscope. By pure chance, that suitable specimen turned out to be me. Unfortunately, even for our communication, there were obstacles not of a technical, but of a fundamentally cosmological nature, despite the fact that, according to him, the concept of conscious intelligence is universal. Io tried to explain the complexity of the task he was facing using analogies. In fact, most of our communication happened through finding familiar analogies from the available library of images. So, imagine that suddenly you wanted to chat with a mold living in a one-dimensional space, or with a type of virus, a clump of self-replicating nucleic acid molecules, which can only barely be called alive. There was a problem, but Io managed to solve it. It's hard to apply our categories of perception to this entity, but I swear, at some point, I thought I could hear notes of self-satisfaction in the tone of the voices interrupting each other. Everything I see around me, he told me, is scientific equipment. Io couldn't directly look into our flat world, just as our scientist can't penetrate to the level of quarks and has no idea what the station looks like for me. But that wasn't necessary. By analyzing the repeating structures of my surroundings, he calculated the most frequent pattern and artificially recreated a section of pseudo-spacetime that was indistinguishable, from his point of view, from the familiar environment. He reproduced it with high accuracy within permissible error margins. After all, the subject of contact must feel safe. Haha. In short, he had designed the station, an input-output interface ensuring the translation of information from one reality to another, employing the data flow for the perception of each interlocutor. And in the end, he placed the object of study, me, within it. I came to truly appreciate the grandeur of the work he had done. After all, using his own comparison, he had managed to understand what the simplest connected to the interface thinks and wants. But success didn't come immediately. The first version of the station turned out to be an imperfect imitation of the environment and frightened the simple. Drawing conclusions, Io spent additional resources on calibrating the system and repeated the experiment. This time, as you remember, the subject showed cautious interest and almost dared to step onto the lab table. But something was still missing. Io sifted through and discarded options until he stumbled upon a genius, simple solution. After all, other similar beings, swarming nearby, were naturally endowed with the organic interface suitable for natural communication between individuals. So, he built a graph of my interactions, selected another subject whose connection, and thus the level of mutual understanding was maximal, and included it in his system as an interpreter component. Eureka! It turned out to be so simple. In our language, there's even a term for this technology. Chinese room. He had to tinker with it. Remove the excess organic matter, he said. But in the end, the goal was achieved. I think I understood everything at that moment. With a trembling voice, I asked Io to show me this component of the system, if possible. He only rejoiced at my interest in his discovery. The crowd parted, forming a corridor leading to a row of objects in the corner of the room that looked like grey painted iron cabinets, the kind you might see in a real subway. It turned out that these, too, concealed the necessary equipment for the station's operation. On wobbly legs, I approached the largest human-sized cabinet and pulled at its doors. From inside poured out the same dead light I had already come to know. Inside, spread out on shimmering thin spokes, partly submerged in gel, was the central nervous system of a human being, stripped of, as he said, all unnecessary flesh, like a specimen in an anatomical museum. But this was not just a model. The brain, pierced by glowing threads, connected seamlessly to the spinal cord, wrapped in something closely resembling the mycelium of a parasitic fungus. The branches of the peripheral nerves ended in what could be called connectors, sunk into nests that I would have called instruments or sensors if they had a less nauseating appearance. Carefully choosing my words, I requested direct access to the cognitive subsystem of the interpreter block, saying that this would improve the clarity of the communication channel. Io was intrigued. It was so simple. Apparently, he didn't know the concept of outright lying. The mycelium flickered, weaving into a new, seemingly more suitable configuration for the task at hand. For a while, nothing happened. Then, from the loudspeakers, which were invisible in the darkness above, a sound emerged. A sob, which shifted into distorted, muffled crying through the speakers. And finally,
Anton?
A sorrowful, breathless cry.
Anton, is that you? Where are you? I can't see anything. I'm so scared. It hurts so much. God, it hurts so much. It makes me translate over and over endlessly.
Aline's voice, my ex-girlfriend, echoed off the stone columns, resonating above the heads of the indifferent crowd.
I can't take this anymore. Please, darling, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me. Kill.
The voice I once loved was consumed by cascades of reverberations and ended in the screech of a feedback loop. Unable to bear it any longer, I reached into my pocket and gripped the textured body of the taser. Maybe I could stop this, end her suffering. Silence fell. I couldn't. I was terrified of what an angry, insane, omnipotent God could do to me. When the sound suddenly cut off, I recoiled from the cabinet containing what little remained of my Aline, and slowly sank to my knees. The taser clattered out of my weakening fingers onto the granite floor tiles. Forgive me, please, forgive me. But I can't. I'm not ready to share your fate if Io decides that the damaged component needs to be replaced. Then, I fled. Shoving my way through the confused dolls, I ran into the train car and knocked the braces out of the doors with a few blows. They, as if waiting for that, immediately closed, cutting off the chorus of voices asking some questions. I didn't listen, I cried, pressing my forehead to the cool glass of the door. The train took me back to the real world. I emerged to the surface, shocked by what I had seen. and drowning in the ocean of shame for my cowardly escape. I immediately stumbled to the nearest supermarket to buy vodka and drink myself into oblivion, and then again and again. The worst part was that, even dying from despair, hating myself, I still felt an immense relief that I had saved myself. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't suppress the vile, animalistic triumph of some part inside me, of which I hadn't even known the existence. I left all my equipment, including the borrowed video camera, in the train car. At that moment, I didn't care about it. I must have looked terrible. The old lady at the entrance, rearranging her groceries in a bag, clicked her tongue at me, and the guard who was idly sitting by the window exchanged glances with the cashier and followed me between the shelves, making a half-hearted effort to pretend he wasn't watching the suspicious customer. I stood there for a long time, staring blankly at the alcohol shelf, and when I finally reached out to grab a random bottle, I felt a heavy hand settle on my shoulder. "Young man," the guard said, awkwardly and out of place, jerking his unshaven jaw. "Talk to him." What? I prepared to explain that I hadn't stolen anything, but I was thrown off by this approach. The guard grimaced, as if from a sharp toothache. "Talk to him, Anton." His jaw hung open, and a thread of saliva stretched from the corner of his mouth. "He wants to talk to you," the cashier behind me said, laughing foolishly. Her vacant gaze wasn't focused on anything in particular. New customers, pushing carts, were approaching from the neighboring aisles. The white light of the fluorescent lamps suddenly seemed a little strange, as if one of them had secretly been replaced with a quartz one, while I wasn't looking.
"He won't let us go, darling. He has so much time, endless time."
Now, the voice came from the ceiling speakers, drowning out the soft music. I, not caring about my path, slowly backed away toward the exit. Aileen, and it was her voice, was no longer crying. On the contrary, she seemed terribly calm, so reasonable, patient. And that was even worse than when she asked me to kill her.
"He's torturing me, you know? He doesn't understand, but it's true. You can stop this, please. He just needs to talk to you. He's so...
Curiosity."
Hearing how the insane ghost of my poor girlfriend uttered the last word, I couldn't take it anymore. Turned around and ran home. I glanced back once to see the facade of the fake supermarket melting and slumping in clumps from the edge of the building, which, now I remembered, had never been there. The capabilities of the interface are growing right before my eyes. What will be the next counterfeit? The minibus I'll ride? The audience at the university? Who among my acquaintances and friends, drifting with their faces, will suddenly speak in Aileen's voice? I can't live in such a world. I'm not ready for this at all. And here we are, back to where we started. I'm at home, sitting at my laptop. But is this really it? After all, having dissected Aileen's mind into pieces, it mastered the art of perfectly recreating the environment I know. Now, remembering, I noticed small flaws I saw on my way home. The subway map in the train, now with a couple of new lines. Store signs written in a strange language. Maybe I never left the station. Could it be that I'm still on it? I can no longer trust my own eyes. Looking around, I see how the doorframe morphs, how the corridor leading to the kitchen sags in the middle, like the roof of a greenhouse where water has accumulated. Something is about to break through here. Is that you? Are you reading this, you monster? The yellow light from the kitchen slowly shifts into ultraviolet hues. No, you won't catch me like a lab mouse in your cunning device, where I'll give information and press pedals for food. There's a 12th floor here. I still have time. Since you're so good at imitating the physics of our reality, 10 seconds to unlock the latch and throw open the window. You won't have time to do anything. Choke, you bastard. Aline. Forgive me.